Hello, and welcome to Study with Sudhir. I am T.S. Sudhir, and this is part 2 of our analysis of the poem The Cold Within by James Patrick Kinney. I hope you would have already seen the first part of the video in which we actually went through the poem in detail. Now what we are going to do is to do an even more deep dive into this poem, because I believe this poem is extremely fascinating and it deserves a much more of a detailed explanation on how you should actually interpret different aspects of this poem, which is why I've divided it into two parts. So first you should see the first part of the video and then come to this, so that you can have a very comprehensive understanding of this very fascinating poem. So just to recap, you have seen that there are the 6 people, first white woman, and then there are these 5 men who are seated around a fire, and they have a stick in hand, and only if they actually drop the stick into the fire that the fire can actually continue to burn. And if they do not drop the stick into the fire will get extinguished and then all of them will die, and that's what eventually happens. So we have spoken about the themes: the cold, fire, death, and the futility of extinction, and that's what we'll be looking at very carefully. But I'll just go through the themes along the paragraphs. As we said, the first one spoke about used the word 6 humans. Then there was bleak and bitter cold. That was a use of allegory as a way of conveying alliteration, because both bleak and bitter, the use of the word be in order to emphasize the coldness that much more. The 2 adjectives, bleak and bitter, also convey a sense of urgency. You understand? A sense of urgency that the contribution of the 6 humans is needed in order to ensure that they can actually survive the bleak and bitter cold. And they symbolize also extreme situations in life. The bleak and bitter cold also convey extreme situations in life in terms of climate, when actually one must actually reach out in order to ensure that all 6 of them can survive, and that's precisely what does not happen. So this is a poem which speaks about prejudices, this speaks about human biases, and that's what it reflects, that what one should not do when one is in a deep trouble like these 6 humans are at that particular point in time. Now how is this poem a commentary on the America of those times? And just to give you a sense of the time in which this particular poem was written. Now, there was a lot of discrimination at that time under the African American civil rights movement that was on, in order to ensure that the racism against the blacks would cease. And this is the poem which has been written in the 1960s at the time of the movement. The other part which I would like to actually bring about, 1 minute. The problem with having so many notes is that you do not know which page it is on. Okay, we'll talk about the themes of discrimination, revenge, hatred, and selfishness. One of the themes is hatred. Each character hates one of the other characters, and hence he fails to take action to save the lives of others and of course of himself. The other theme, and I would want you to keep noting this down, pause the video, write it down. The first theme of hatred. The second theme, that of revenge, that one who has been a victim of discrimination, like in the case of the black man, he wants to take revenge against the white woman because she is symbolic of all the white people in the land of America. So he himself, someone who has been abused because of his color, in this case turns an abuser when given an opportunity to take revenge. Similarly, discrimination is the other theme of this particular poem, because the poet has depicted different forms of discrimination through his 6 characters. And the fourth theme is that of selfishness. Hatred, discrimination, revenge, selfishness. Because each individual is so selfish that he would not part with the log that they have with themselves, because they are as much concerned about not helping others. That seems to be much more of a driving force than the fact that with their stake they would be able to help themselves and help themselves survive. As I said, this poem was written during the African American civil rights movement. one of the things that is there right at the beginning of the poem is that, or so the story is told. Now, the way this is called a parable, because a parable is a simple story which is used to illustrate a moral or a spiritual lesson, as told by Jesus Christ in the Gospels. Now, it's quite possible, and this is something which is there in the analysis of this poem, that it is possible that because James Kinney was a devout Christian, he chose this style of a poetic parable because he, as he says, and so this story was told. So he's telling a story which he has heard through generations, perhaps from his parents or his grandparents, and he's using this to voice his opinion on a very controversial topic of his times. And it's also a fact that the Bible itself uses the technique of parables to teach the humans about their mistakes, about their follies, and help them improve themselves. I will repeat, and I would go a little slow if you did not understand, that a parable is a simple story used to illustrate a moral or a spiritual lesson, and as told by Jesus Christ in the Bible. And this is the technique which has been used by James Patrick Kinney here. And the Bible also uses the technique of parables to teach the human beings about their mistakes, about their follies, and help them improve themselves. Okay. Okay. Now we go through each of the paragraphs. We have already spoken about the humans. What does it mention in the first video itself? I was speaking about the themes of cold, fire, and death. Cold. Now, the cold is really the recurring theme of this particular poem because it holds two meanings. One at a surface level, the bleak and bitter cold. So, obviously, that's the first cold that James Patrick Kinney is referring to. The other and more significant cold that he is referring to is the cold within each one of them. Each one of them holds no warmth. He holds no warmth for the other human being. Each one of them is extremely cold and not just selfish but also prejudiced and biased and not wanting to save the other human beings. So it refers to the cold hearts of each of the six individuals. Fire is the other major theme of this particular poem. Again, it has two meanings. One, referring to the fire created by the burning wood, that is the literal sense that unless they have the fire, and he's already referred to the dying fire a couple of times. So unless you have this fire, they would not be able to survive. So that's the first fire. The deeper meaning of the theme of fire is the fire of humanity inside every individual. But because they are so cold inside, the fire of humanity is also getting extinguished. The term fire in the poem can also be considered to mean that the American nation, the country of America, was also slowly dying under the pressure of all kinds of discrimination which were prevalent at the time of the African American civil rights movement. So it's also a reference to the America of those times in the 1960s, the kind of situation that was there, and it's also a commentary on the America of those times. The dying fire, as I mentioned in the first video, it means that the group's prospects do not look very good. It's also the way he has used the phrase dying fire, their dying fire is also some kind of a silent appeal from the fire to the group to help themselves by putting their sticks into the fire so that the fire can save them, stay alive. So the dying fire is also some kind of a silent appeal to each one of the six individuals. Then of course we have spoken about each one of the people, the white woman, the person from the church, the third person, the poor person. Normally a poor person, you would imagine that he should be more favorably, more positively disposed towards a rich man. But in this case, we realize that the poor man is also a victim of classism. Is a victim of classism, CLASSISM, or discrimination based on social or economic class, considering, and he considers those who are better than him to be idle. He uses the phrase idle rich. So he is very defensive, and in his eyes the rich do not deserve his kindness, and therefore he will not part with his stick. None of them, in fact none of the six, have the sagacity, have the intelligence, have the wisdom to realize that unless they do that, each one of them is only going to perish at the end. The fourth person, the rich person, is also a victim of apathy because he's only thinking about his wealth that he has created and he has at his disposal without realizing that if he does not remain alive, all that wealth is just a waste of money. It's not going to be able to come to his help in any way. The only thing that is going to come to his help is that stick of wood. So that's at the end of it, it's just that little piece of wood that is going to save him, not all the wealth that he has hoarded all his life. And he's also a victim of classism because he considers all those poor people as being lazy and aimless. Again, the fifth person is also a victim of abuse, but he becomes the abuser here. And the spark of human kindness in that sense has died in him also. Just like we assume that the poor person should be favorably disposed towards the rich man, the black man to be favorably disposed towards the white woman, but that does not happen because the abused is also an abuser out here, and he sees in this opportunity, in this situation, an opportunity to actually take revenge against the white woman and the white race in general. So he would not also put the stick into the fire. So it becomes at the end of the day a vicious circle of hatred and resentment. Please write down this phrase. It becomes a vicious circle of hatred and resentment, and they are so myopic in their view. They are not able to see far. They are so myopic in their view that they are willing to endanger the lives of everyone, including themselves, just because of the hatred for just one person in the group. This person does not hate 2, 3, 4 and 6. He hates the first person, but is willing to endanger everyone else's life just because of his hatred for that one individual. The death, as we mentioned in the first video, is personified here using the phrase still hands, and the final lines in fact of the poem actually abound. I mean, they're full of irony, because it says the logs held tight in death's still hands was proof of human sin. They did not die from the cold without, they died from the cold within. So the poet is very clear that they did not die because of the bleak and bitter cold, but they died because of the cold within their own hearts. We realize that it was not the cold weather outside that really killed the group, it was the cold in their hearts, the lack of warm human spirits. It is a commentary on the futility of exclusion. The futility of exclusion means that they are excluding everyone else. At the end of the day, they themselves get excluded from the world because they are not able to live. The fire, the other meaning of fire, we have spoken about the fire of humanity, and of course the literal sense of the fire being there right at the center. It's also, the fire is symbolic of the resources of the world and the wealth that the natural resources and the wealth that the world has to offer in terms of forests, the seas, the mountains. And what it shows, that if we discriminate on the basis of wealth, on the basis of caste, on the basis of religion, on the basis of color, it will only lead everyone to death and doom. This is the other larger meaning of fire as a theme in this particular poem, which can lead everyone to exclusion and death. Yes, and we have already spoken of the other four themes of discrimination, revenge, selfishness, and hatred. Okay, so there are these different themes that the poet very cleverly and very smartly has actually woven into this entire poem, The Cold Within. So it is a commentary on the society itself. It's a comment on the society itself, not just of the America of the 1960s, but it could very well be true even today in any other part of the world also. In that sense, because of their selfishness, they end up writing their own epitaph. Please note down this phrase, they end up writing their own epitaph. Epitaph is something which is written on the tombstone after a person is dead and gone in the Christian faith, but the epitaph essentially conveys this essence of a person's life. So in this particular case, they write their own epitaph, which means they're all dead at the end of the day. And in their epitaph, it will only be written that they were all very prejudiced and biased against another individual, even though death was essentially staring at them. So these are the themes which you should know about the fact that each one of them is very intolerant, as a result of which he or she does not want to save anyone else's life. If you have any doubts about any of the themes that I have spoken about. If you do not understand it, please write it in the comment section. I could possibly do another video explaining some of the points that you may not have understood, or you could write it to our email ID studywithsudhir@gmail.com. Please do write in with your comments as to how you are finding these lessons, whether these lessons are being useful to you, and whether you are able to understand and take down points and be able to write more intelligent answers which will impress the examiner, because poems like The Cold Within are essentially a test of how well you are able to interpret a very intricate poem like this, because it's, as I said, it's not just about six people seated around a fire. It has very, very deep meanings, not just at a literal sense, but also in the sense of the world, not just in the 1960s, but even the world of today. So do write in with your comments, because only then I will be able to know how well you are understanding the lessons and the points that I'm making in these videos. So do subscribe and also press the bell icon so that you can get regular updates, and keep looking at the other chapters that I've also covered in different videos on Study with Sudhir, and also the different motivational videos that I will be putting up, so that you can be well prepared, better prepared for the examination that will start in the month of February, but also the pre-finals that will be there in the month of November and January. All the best to you. Thank you very much for watching Study with Sudhir.